Hello, my friends, and welcome to Crimes and Curiosities. I'm your host, Charity, and on this show, we are going to be diving deep into true crime, conspiracy theories, the internet's strangest rabbit holes, and history's wildest times. Think of it as highly analytical meets highly human, or in my case, a little weird, a little nerdy, and completely fascinated by the stories that we're about to uncover. To introduce myself, I'm a mom who works from home, and like so many of us, I've been looking for a creative outlet, something that mixes my natural curiosity with storytelling, and honestly, a way to make sense of the strange and fascinating corners of life. I've always been interested in true crime, conspiracy theories, supernatural, and life's overall curiosities. That analytical part of me, plus a highly ADHD brain, means that I notice details that a lot of people won't. And quite frankly, it means that when I see a thread, I can't help but pull on it until I see the bigger picture. If you know me, then you've likely heard of my other podcast, The Unstable Brew, where I co host with one of my best friends, Taylor. On that show, we talk about everything going on in our chaotic lives and what's brewing up in this world and maybe even beyond. But on this show, things will be a little different. On this show, we're going to be diving deep into the stories themselves, many of which leaving us with more questions than answers. So for episode 1, I have chosen a story that has fascinated many for years. A story that combines mystery, identity, social media, and the human condition itself. A story about a man known to many as mostly harmless. On July 23rd, 2018, deep in Big Cypress National Preserve, two hikers stumbled upon a bright yellow tent just a few miles outside of Highway 75. Inside, they found a heart-wrenching scene. A man who is described as in later states of decomposition, with long brown hair that was graying and a scraggly beard, stated to be completely emaciated. Collier County investigators would describe the scene as strange, stating that it was obvious he wasn't some lost wanderer with no supplies. He had more than what he needed. He had food, he had $3,500 in cash, and despite it being the middle of July, he had enough clothes to last well into the winter months. This alone is odd, considering most experienced hikers know to travel light, bringing only the necessities. What was even more interesting was what was missing from his pack. He had no ID, no phone, and no credit cards. Basically, nothing there to state who this man was. Additionally, found in his backpack were notebooks that contained pages and pages of highly intricate handwritten code. The lead investigator would state that it was something only to be described as having been written by a complete and total madman or a genius. Now, I personally keep a lot of journals, and so I understand if somebody who has never seen my journal before were to look at it, it would look a little crazy. But those are simple projects, things that would be around my house, maybe some random pages filled with measurements for things that I'm currently working on. But to look at somebody's journal who has filled it with pages and pages, again, of highly intricate code, and you've never seen code before, obviously that's going to look absolutely crazy. And to add on to the top of this, that this man is in the middle of the woods and he doesn't even have a phone on him, let alone an iPad or a computer that he would use this code on. It would definitely look strange to anybody. But then you add all of this on top of the fact that this man did in fact have everything that he needed to survive. He had food, yet he starved. He had money and was only a few miles away from a highway if he did actually need help, yet he died alone in his tent. He had no phone, no computer, and he has no ID. There's no way to tell who this man is. So at the start of this case, we're already showing so many questions that the investigators themselves really weren't sure what to make of. Despite all of these questions, investigators honestly believe that this would be a simple case solved within a matter of a few hours, maybe a few days. He would likely be some local hiker that his family would know is missing. All that they should have to do is put out a few feelers, see if there had been any local hikers who had gone out recently and just not returned, and they should hear something back fairly soon. Unfortunately, we wouldn't be here if that was the case. His fingerprints, his dental records, and his DNA would all be run across every available national database for a missing persons, with no matches being found. Eventually, they would doctor his picture so that way it would be possibly more recognizable to the public and release that in hopes that a family member or friend would recognize him and claim him. Additionally, they would add to this photo the mention of a small scar that was found on his abdomen. Despite this photo and information being released to the public both on social media and local news, no claims were made to the body found. At the beginning, only a handful of online forums would take notice of the case. But in 2019, something shifted. People on the Appalachian Trail forums would take notice of the man's face, and they would remember him from the trail. Additionally, they would also remember his trail name. And now, if you don't know what a trail name is, when you're a hiker, typically you meet other people on the trail, and they'll give you a name specifically to describe your character. Possibly something to do with your clothes or the way that you carry yourself, and it's always given to you. You never choose it yourself. And so for this man, people would remember him as Denim or Mostly Harmless. And once his name was shared, the stories began being shared. And then came the Facebook groups. Led by North Carolina's Natasha Teasley and a network of citizen sleuths, these Facebook groups grew into something that, while informal, was a very powerful task force. Members would take photos that were sequenced from hikers and chart his journey and cross-reference aliases. Through their dedicated work, investigators were able to find that Mostly Harmless had started his original journey in Maine and made the trek all the way down to Florida throughout the process of about a year and a half. During this time, he would meet hundreds of people, many of whom described him as mostly harmless. He was kind, approachable, and even charming. One notable hiker with the trail name of Magpie hiked with him a few different times. She was an older hiker in her later 60s when she started to hike a portion of the Appalachian Trail. And due to this, most hikers would kind of brush her off and not give her much time, seeing her as someone who wasn't as serious or probably shouldn't be on the trail at all. But Mostly Harmless was always kind to her, stopping to take the time to talk with her, have conversations, and sometimes even share a long portion of the trek. She would later state that she, as well as many of their friends, would often joke around with him trying to guess his real name, but he would never give it. She knew him as Denim, a name that she believes was his original trail name due to him starting his journey in denim jeans. Again, this is another trait that we're seeing from this man that shows that he might not have been as experienced of a hiker as many had believed. Because when you're hiking, you don't do so in denim jeans. You typically wear something light, something that's durable, but will keep you cool. The later trail name of Mostly Harmless is stated to have originated when he met a group of campers at their campsite, and when weary of him, he would call himself Mostly Harmless. Additionally, after more investigation was done, it was found that when he would sign himself into hostels or little motels, he would sign himself in under the name Ben Billamy. Obviously, this led investigators to believe that maybe this was his real name. Unfortunately, though, this would just come to be found as another alias used by this mysterious person. What we see from various hikers that Mostly Harmless would travel with is that he would give everyone different backstories. To some, he was from New York. To others, he was from Louisiana. He would often state that maybe he worked in tech. It was always just enough to start a conversation, but never enough to lead anyone to the truth about who he could be. Never quite enough to trace. For months, the search for Mostly Harmless remained confined to Facebook groups, trail forums, and podcasts. The case had the attention of hikers and hobbyists, but it was still relatively unknown to the wider public. But all of that changed when the editor of Wired took notice. The hook wasn't just that a man was found in the Everglades, but it was the notebooks. You remember those, the ones that were filled with pages of intricate code that didn't quite make sense for a man not even carrying a phone in the middle of the Florida Everglades? While these pages and pages of intricate computer programming code made no sense to the original investigation, it spoke volumes to the tech community. Why would somebody who is so gifted at logic and engineering choose to live completely off the grid and die alone in a tent? The Wired editor saw that this wasn't just your normal human interest story. It was a story about technology, anonymity, and the impossibility of disappearing in the digital age. And we can kind of understand the thought process on this storyline. I mean, the digital age can be scary. You think about everything that you've posted over the past 10, 15 years. Is any of it really gone? I mean, you can Google search your name and stories from 2012, 2010 may pop up of something that you posted one time on your story on Facebook or on MySpace. And let's say that even you don't have one. Everyone around you does. All you have to do is be walking up the street and somebody outside filming a TikTok catches you. Now you're on the internet. The digital age itself makes it nearly impossible to live completely off the grid. Yet this man attempted to do it. But of course, as we can see, because of all of these hikers that he traveled with along the trail, we were able to still capture him and see his face and learn a little bit of his story piece by piece. Despite traveling with no phone, traveling with only cash, no cards, nothing that could trace us back to an actual name, we're still able to see a little bit of this man's life, at least for the past year and a half. And this led the Wired editor to an understanding of where this man must have been mentally. He was obviously incredibly brilliant, incredibly skilled at computers, and yet here he is trying his hardest to live completely off the grid. So the question then lies, was he running from something, or was he running from himself? The outlet then began covering the case in depth. It spotlighted everything from the strange details of the case, the notebooks, and the citizen sleuths online working tirelessly to find out who this man was. Once this coverage began, the investigation itself amplified immensely. Facebook groups would later state that their numbers would double or even triple in size overnight after the Wired story ran. This would lead programmers online to study the code that was photographed and eventually recognize it. And once the code was recognized, the platform on which it was used was found. These weren't just random equations. They were snippets of code used specifically in an online AI game named Screeps. Screeps is an online programming game where players build artificial intelligence to control colonies in a persistent shared world. Within days, members of Screeps confirmed that much of the handwriting perfectly aligned with commands from the game. Even phrases like "mostly harmless" would tie the mysterious hiker's trail name to an account under the username Vahor. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm not 100% sure, so please correct me if I'm wrong. Vahor would make many posts in the game's Slack channel. And if you don't know what that is, it's an online forum where you can communicate with other people, kind of like an online chat. Vahor would make many posts in the game's online Slack channel, communicating with other players on the game, often stating eerie and mysterious comments, much like the line that was seen in January of 2017, "I'm mostly harmless, quote, for now." And the last message that would be sent by Vahor on the chat would be in mid-April of 2017, right before Mostly Harmless was first spotted on the Appalachian Trail. So this link would give investigators something new to go off of. Not only was the hiker skilled in programming, but he also left behind an online persona that could be traced, studied, and connected to others. The notebooks, once thought of as scribblings of a lost soul, became the bridge of an unidentified man in the Everglades and a digital footprint that eventually helped confirm his true identity. Now, this is one of my most favorite parts of this entire story because it goes to show just how powerful human curiosity can really be. Moving into 2020, as the case languished, dedicated Facebook groups would form to consolidate their information and coordinate their search efforts. In July of 2020, members of the Facebook group Ben Bellamy pulled together their resources and crowdfunded $5,000 in a matter of 8 days for advanced DNA testing. They would partner with a company named Othram Inc., which is a lab based out of Texas that specializes in forensic genetic genealogy for cold cases. What is incredibly amazing about companies like Othram Inc. when compared to other DNA testing is that it doesn't just compare the results to those that are already in government databases. It digs deeper. It's able to find connections as to where an individual may have grown up, what that person's ethnic group was, as well as possible relatives. With DNA analysis finally on the way, it only took authorities a couple of months to find their answer. They were able to see that the hiker had Cajun roots from Louisiana, specifically Assumption Parish. And this was a crucial breakthrough in the case as it provided investigators with not only a geographical focus for their search, but possibly family members as well. Taking a quick sidebar here, talking about companies like Othram Inc. always just amazes me. The work that they're able to do on cold cases that are 50, 60, 70 plus years old. I mean, we see that they're able to find answers to cases like the Golden State Killer, and even just as recently, the yogurt shop murders. And if you haven't heard about that one, it was a case that was solved just about a month ago from a 1992 case out of Austin where 4 teenage girls were murdered in a yogurt shop after closing, and then their bodies were burned, leaving behind very little evidence. Due to this, there were often theories as to who may have done it. In fact, 2 people were investigated quite heavily and almost brought to trial, but no one was ever convicted. And here we are, just as of last month, over 30 years after the case, we finally have an answer. And while sometimes the answers that come from those cases aren't always what people would want or expect, it is an answer, and it's finally given to us because of companies like these that are able to dig so much deeper than what typical DNA testing can do. So I did just want to take a moment and just really spotlight that. But additionally, when we look at the crowdsourcing that was done by these Facebook groups, it just amazes me because not only do we have the human curiosity digging in, trying to figure out who this man is, but we also see just the heart of humanity coming in to work and provide their own sources to help provide a name for this person, someone who they have no idea who it is. They don't know if he's a good guy, if he's a bad guy, if he was out there on his own, did something horrible, if he was hiding from someone, they took time and money and everything out of their own life to figure out who this person was. It's beautiful, and it's compassion, and it's curiosity. And to me, it just brings out the goodness in humanity at a time where, honestly, we don't always get to see that. Now, prior to the testing, there were theories as to who Mostly Harmless was, going into the idea of these Facebook groups didn't know who they were paying to find the name of. He could have been a bad guy. There were many theories out there that explained, well, maybe he was on the run. He committed a murder or a crime that was absolutely heinous and was on the run trying to hide from authorities. Other people theorized some things that were a little bit crazier, that he was a ghost wandering the woods for all eternity. Others that he was an alien, just here to explore our foliage and then disappear off into the night, never to be seen again. Now, I'm just like you. We're all here because we like curious things, and we all like a little bit of the strange. But if we're being realistic here, some theories were just out there. However, after 2 years of theories, thanks to the genealogy testing, the investigators were able to localize their search to Assumption Parish. They started bombarding their social media pages and their local news stations with pictures of Mostly Harmless, as well as information about who he was on the trail and the small scar that was also stated to be on his abdomen. And it was at this point that a coworker of Mostly Harmless came forward. Choosing to stay anonymous, she used only her middle name of Marie, and she would state that she recognized him based off of his picture and the code that was in the notebooks. She would also come to say that while the person she knew had much larger than a small scar on his abdomen, he did have a scar on his abdomen as well. After receiving this information, authorities were able to compare DNA testing with that of the family members and verify in 2021 that Mostly Harmless was Vance John Rodriguez. Born in 1976, raised in Baton Rouge, at 41, an IT tech worker with Cajun roots would move to New York and leave with a troubled past. Now, this is where the story shifts, because once Vance had a name, the internet's portrait of him as this kind, mysterious hiker named Mostly Harmless would clash with a much darker truth. Upon being identified as Vance Rodriguez, the story of Mostly Harmless was transformed from a mysterious internet-fueled puzzle into a tragic and troubling narrative of a deeply troubled man. Information gathered from his past revealed a pattern of mental health struggles, abusive behavior, and a profound disconnect from others. Born in South Louisiana in 1976, Rodriguez was reportedly abused as a child. He once told his coworker a story of his father inviting him out into his front yard to fight, a fight which Vance would then reject and walk away from. But this pain of an abusive childhood would cause a permanent rift between him and his family. At age 15, Rodriguez would walk into an open field one night and attempt suicide, shooting himself in the stomach with a large gun. While bleeding out, he would then change his mind and decide to fight for his life, waving down a truck that would happen to be passing by at just the right time and saving his own life. The surgery that would follow is what would lead to the large scar shown on his abdomen that his coworker would also recognize when identifying him. It was later stated by Rodriguez's friends that he would often state wanting to eventually be buried in that same field. Later at 17, Rodriguez would become fully emancipated from his parents. At the time of his death, it was stated that Rodriguez had not been in contact with anybody in his family for a period of years. During this time, Rodriguez would attend the University of Southwestern Louisiana, which is now known as the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, but he would not graduate. Despite not having the official degree, he was later described by coworkers as being highly intelligent and highly skilled in his field. Additionally, during this time, Rodriguez would have a long-term relationship with a woman that would unfortunately end in heartbreak, leading him to meet with another woman online and eventually move to New York to live with her. But more on that in a moment. Those who knew Rodriguez later in life would describe him as having a reoccurring pattern of mental health struggles. Former girlfriends and friends would often state that he would experience long bouts of depression, and it was during these times that he would experience what they referred to as outages. During these times, he would both emotionally and physically detach himself from his problems and anything happening in his life, simply disappearing. He would often spend these times playing video games for upwards of 18 hours a day, possibly going to work, but that would be it. Otherwise, he would never even leave his apartment. These episodes were a key pattern in Rodriguez avoiding any sort of emotional responsibility or conflict in his life, which would later culminate in his disappearance into the woods. And it was also in part due to these outages that many of his friends did not consider him missing, despite him having been no contact for upwards of a year and a half. They simply believed that he was experiencing one of his outages and would snap out of it one day and just start showing up again and pretending like everything was normal, as he had done multiple times before. Now, returning to Rodriguez's romantic life, despite the gentle and kind face that was often described of Mostly Harmless on the trail, those closest to Rodriguez experienced a different side of him. Women he dated both in Louisiana and New York would describe him as both physically and emotionally abusive. One specifically stating, and I quote, "Apartment $950 a month, bills $300 a month, standing up to the monster that beat you up emotionally and physically for 5 years? Priceless." It was actually after his breakup with his New York girlfriend that was fueled by violence and cruelty that Rodriguez would pay his rent up to 6 months in advance and disappear out the door for upwards of 8 months before his landlord would discover him missing. The revelation of Rodriguez's darker side shook many in the Facebook groups. Many sleuths felt betrayed, questioning whether the man they had spent years humanizing was even the same person that they had found in reality. Others refused to accept the darker accounts, clinging to the trail stories that they knew so well of a man who was filled with kindness and charm. It would create this fracture between the idealized memory of Mostly Harmless and the complicated reality of Vance Rodriguez. Specifically, many people would find it very difficult to believe that this person that they saw on a trail could be so kind and so charming and yet be this horrible, abusive person in reality. One person specifically shared of a time that he spent with Mostly Harmless, where they would discuss and share memories of both growing up in abusive households. When he found the reality of who Vance Rodriguez was, he said he was shook to the core. This person who he believed to have shared this camaraderie with, an experience that nobody should have to go through, and yet he saw them as two sides of the same coin. Someone who had experienced this horrible start to life could make one of two decisions. They could choose to do what this other trail hiker had done, which was become a better person and choose to live every day with more love and kindness, or they could do what Mostly Harmless did, which was become just another person sharing the pattern of abuse throughout his life. So here we are. 2 years later, the mystery unraveled. Mostly Harmless is Vance Rodriguez. But now we have the next question. Why would Vance Rodriguez walk into the woods to never return? From this point, theories begin to swirl. Did he do this on purpose? Was he running from something that he had done? Did he make a mistake? Or was it intended to be a suicide all along? Personally, I believe that Vance Rodriguez walked into the woods never intending to return. He brought everything that he would need: clothes to last him as long as he wanted, fake names to keep him under the radar, and cash to stay off the grid. But this would lead us to the next theory, that many believe his names were chosen specifically as a final message. The phrase "mostly harmless" comes directly from Douglas Adams' beloved science fiction series, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In this fictional guidebook, Earth's entry is updated from a single word, harmless, to mostly harmless. It's a line that's originally meant as a joke, but in the final novel of the series, mostly harmless would carry a darker tone as characters face the end of their world. This, along with the term that was used in the online AI game Screep's Slack channel, stating, "I'm mostly harmless for now," lead many to believe that he deliberately borrowed the name, aligning himself with Adam's themes of anonymity, absurdity, and even morality. So while Ben Bellamy was a mask with no clear meaning, mostly harmless tied Rodriguez to a work of fiction about wandering, survival, and resignation to the inevitable, echoing the same contradictions that people saw in him: kind yet troubled, present yet hidden, alive yet already fading away. Vance Rodriguez was not a hero. He was complicated. He was brilliant yet wounded, capable of both kindness and cruelty. And yet in death, he became a symbol, a mystery that strangers united to solve. Thousands of people who never met him, who never met each other, worked together to give him back his name. They shared stories, they shared theories, they raised money, all for a man who could have been anybody. And maybe that's what fascinates me about this case. He wanted to be anonymous, to simply slip away. But humanity, our need to understand, to connect, and to care, that's what pulled him back into the light. As someone who's always been drawn to mysteries and curiosity, I think that this is the perfect story to start this show by diving into. It reminds us that behind every riddle is a person, and behind every person is a story that's more complicated than you can ever see at first glance. Thank you for joining me on this exciting first episode. I'm excited to keep exploring stories just like this one, stories that make us question, pause, analyze, and wonder. If you enjoyed this, please share, subscribe on all the socials, and drop me a comment down below of anything that you would like for me to deep dive into in the future. I'm into anything here. We look at true crime, conspiracy theories, cold cases, Reddit stories, you name it, I'll read it, I promise. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on this case. What are your theories as to why Mostly Harmless walked into those woods? Do you think he intended to come out? Do you think he was hiding from something or someone? Or do you think that he was trying to disconnect from technology and reality as a whole? I'm super excited to hear from you. Thank you again so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.